CLR James is one of the most outstanding black intellectuals of his time. This year, to mark his 85th birthday, an exhibition has been mounted of his life and work, and a new production of his play, Black Jacobins, the first since Paul Robeson took the role of Toussaint Louverture in 1936. James has spent much of his life in England and the United States as novelist, historian, cricket writer, above all political theorist and activist. But he was born in Trinidad in 1901 and lived there for the first 30 years of his life.
My mother's father was an engine driver. He drove from San Fernando to Princeton and back. He was notable because he was a fireman, and there were no black engine drivers. But his engine driver died suddenly, and they didn't know what to do, so they gave him the job as fireman, and he became the first black fireman, and he was put to fill in the gap, and he kept it. And my father's father came from Antigua, one of those islands, where black men used to see after the sugar. But in Trinidad, black men were not allowed to do that. In Trinidad, that job was done by white people. But he came from Antigua, and he could do it. So when there was a problem in the shop, he said, I can do it. And they put him to do it, and he took it. So on both sides, I came from the black, not so high lower middle class. we were something. And my mother is to this day the most persistent reader I know.
You say that about both your parents several times.
My father was a teacher, and he was trained at the Tranquility Training School, and he was number one. So between them I grew up. I came to England, and people asked me, but James, how do you speak English so well? I said, I've never spoken anything else.
But it's not just that you spoke English. By then you had read.
Not only that, what I'm trying to say is, in the house, my mother read everything, without discrimination, everything. And I'm in the house, she read, she would tell me, don't read that, but she would put it in some part of her press. I would find it and read it.
But what kinds of things were you reading?
I tell you, there was Thackeray, there was Dickens, there was Charlotte Bronte, there was Charles Garvis, there was a woman called Mrs. E.D.E.N. Southworth, a whole lot of people, all the people in those days. Because my mother was such a reader, anybody who had a book to read or a book to be read came to my mother. And I'm astonished, when I was about 7 or 8, in the house, she had her own Shakespeare, she had her own Vanity Fair, and her own Last of the Mohicans. And nowadays, I look back at what the world was like in 1907. I say that because I was not yet 8 when I began to take exams. And I find it astonishing that my mother, so happened, had been so educated.
That's very
remarkable
at the time.
I don't think there were many people in those days who, except the middle classes in England, who had the opportunities that I had. And it wasn't only one book. She kept on reading, so that I had books all the time. But one book in the house that was there for a long time, Vanity Fair, I read that over and over.
I wonder whether you know how many times you read Vanity Fair.
I don't know, but I read it twice a year. I read it all the time until I was about 30-something. The book means a lot to me. It shaped my early life. So it's not why Vanity Fair, but what Vanity Fair. I kept on reading it. And I was so young when I was reading it that when I came to Major Dobbin, I would have to turn back to see where he came in. And I mark the page. So when I get into trouble with Dobbin, I know exactly where to go and read him. Now that's my life. That's the way I begin. But I was a bright boy. And I must say, I didn't know that. It's only afterwards that I began to look at the advantages and the disadvantages of having been, number one, a bright boy, and number two, the schoolmaster's son.
Did that separate you from other children?
Separated me very much. Separated me from them and separated them from me. Because I could read and read a lot of books, so that obviously they, and when anything came up, I had read it, I knew. My God, from the time I was about 6 years old, I have been the one to know. It's only within the last 10 years that I have become an ignoramus, not knowing.
At the age of 11, he entered the world of Queen's Royal College, or QRC, a kind of English public school transplanted to Port of Spain.
I went to QRC and made 2 adventures into knowledge. I began to play cricket and to read about it and to learn about it, and I began to read books, all books. There were books in the library, but the master's room had a set of books, which every master who had come there, he would bring a book and put it in, and so on. And I used to lunch at school. My parents in the country, I would come bring my lunch to eat. And the master's library, all the books were there. And there were books on the master's tables in every room. All English literature and a good bit of French literature, Latin and Greek were at my disposal. So from the time I was about 11, Latin, Greek, French, some European literature, between 11 and 18, that was there. I had nothing to do but to take it, and what I didn't like, I put back. Those were exceptional circumstances. I want to get, not every boy got a range of literature like that. I happened to take my lunch at the school, and at 11:15, everybody went home, and I had nothing to do but to eat my sandwich, and there were the books. And I had a wonderful, I look back now, that was an exceptional opportunity which I used.
But how did the interest in cricket begin? I don't mean playing, because lots of people play,
No,
but the interest in studying cricket.
No, my father gave me a bat and a ball when I was about 4 years old. Because he had been a cricketer in those days. To be a cricketer in the Caribbean was something. You were a civilized person. What I look back at is there were 8 masters there. 7 of them were men who had degrees from Oxford and Cambridge. So they gave their stamp to the school. And we grew up that way. In addition, there were books in the library, one by a writer, boys writer called P.G. Wodehouse. Wrote a lot of books about English public school. And I read those books. And those books and the masters, the way they behaved, the way they conducted themselves, the way they spoke, and the games that we played, because I had been playing a lot of cricket with a piece of a bat or some ball or some orange, but it was organized. And there was first 11, second 11, third 11, fourth 11. There we were, organized. So I got into an organized society different from the one I came from, but it was organized not so much in learning. I paid little attention to what they taught me in school, but I plunged head foremost into the organization of society outside. First of all, the games that we had once a year, and I became a tremendous high jumper. For years, I was the highest jumper in the Caribbean. When at one time I was jumping 5'11", and the world record was 6'3", which told me because we jumped sideways in those days. I was interested in that. Cricket, football I played, but cricket I learned to become an authority. So I've been writing on cricket since I was about 18. So playing and writing, and not only that, I was the authority, I was the expert. Due to my curiosity, because everything I could find I read, and my marvelous memory.